Captain America was last seen on a classified solo mission, and then he vanished without a trace. 2 days later, his shield returned, drenched in blood. The blood wasn't Steve Rogers, but it wasn't fully human either. The shield had deep scratches, carved by a weapon no one recognized. When Tony Stark analyzed the blood, the results were impossible. It matched Steve's DNA exactly. But how can Steve be alive, and missing at the same time? SHIELD pulled the final mission footage. Steve was running from something, but the camera couldn't capture the shadow behind him. And the most terrifying part? They found Steve's nail marks on the shield, as if he didn't want to let it go. Steve Rogers didn't disappear in the middle of a battlefield or during some world-ending crisis. He vanished doing something that should have been routine, a simple reconnaissance mission in the Arctic, the kind he used to walk through without breaking a sweat. SHIELD had intercepted a strange signal coming from beneath the ice, an ancient frequency pulsing like a heartbeat. No coordinates, no origin, just a low repeating thrum that wouldn't shut off. Most people dismissed it as underground seismic activity. Steve didn't. Something about that signal felt familiar, like a whisper from a past he didn't remember. He didn't take a full team. He didn't even take backup. He told the Avengers he'd be back before sunrise. Natasha rolled her eyes, Tony called him Mr. Boy Scout, and Thor laughed that no ice could swallow the captain. Steve only smiled and said, "It's nothing. Just checking out a noise." But when the Quinjet touched down on the frozen plateau, the wind began to howl like something alive. The signal grew louder, not in the comms, but inside Steve's ears, like it was calling his name. The deeper he ventured into the ice caves, the stranger everything felt. His breath turned to frost instantly, and shadows twisted into shapes that moved when he didn't. Something was down there, not physical, but present, like a pressure pushing into his mind. Steve gripped his shield tighter. He didn't realize this was the last time anyone would see him alive. When Steve reached the heart of the cave, he found a circular opening carved perfectly smooth, as if melted by heat far hotter than fire. The signal was coming from inside. He stepped closer, freezing air slicing across his skin, when suddenly his comms erupted into static so violent he had to tear the earpiece out. Then silence, so sharp it hurt. Steve whispered, "If someone's down there, I'm here to help." His voice echoed back, distorted and delayed, repeating the same words but in a deeper, unfamiliar tone. He raised his shield, heart pounding, and took one step forward. The ground cracked. The ice trembled. And from the darkness of the tunnel, two glowing blue eyes opened. They weren't human. Steve stumbled back, and the thing inside the tunnel moved toward him, faster than anything he'd ever encountered. Not running. Not crawling. Shifting, like liquid shadows suddenly taking shape. Steve raised his shield just as the ice behind him shattered, and a violent rush of freezing wind swallowed him whole. The Quinjet's beacon blinked for a moment, then went dark. Every trace of Steve Rogers vanished in a single breath, no footprints, no dropped gear, nothing but silence. Back at the Avengers compound, Friday tried to reconnect. Nothing. Not a single ping from Steve's suit, not even an emergency heartbeat signal. It was as if the Arctic had erased him. The only detail the team would learn later was that Steve's final position, right before the signal went dead, was directly above something buried deep under the ice. Something older than Captain America. Something that woke up when he arrived. 2 days after Steve Rogers vanished, an alarm ripped through the Avengers compound. Not a distress call, not a message, just a single ping from a tracker that hadn't activated in years. It was Steve's shield beacon. The shield didn't normally broadcast alone, it was synced to Steve's suit, his biometrics, his heartbeat. But this time, only the shield called out. And it was coming from a location no one expected, an abandoned fishing port on the northern coast of Iceland, hundreds of miles from where Steve disappeared. Tony and Natasha were the first to reach the area. The place was dead silent. No people, no animals, not even the sound of waves, just an unnatural stillness that felt wrong. The air carried a metallic scent, sharp enough to sting. Natasha's instincts flared instantly. Something had happened there, something that didn't belong in a world built for humans. The tracker's signal grew stronger as they approached an old wooden warehouse. The doors were broken inward, not outward, as if something had forced its way inside. Tony pushed through the debris, his HUD flickering with interference. Electronic signals died in the air like someone was swallowing them. At the center of the warehouse, in a pool of cold moonlight, lay the object they feared and recognized instantly. Steve Rogers' shield. But not the way they remembered it. Not clean. Not shining. It was soaked, absolutely drenched, in blood. The red streaks were splashed across the star, dripping down the stripes, dried in thick, dark layers along the edges. Natasha approached carefully, scanning for fingerprints, footprints, anything. There were none. It was as if someone had placed the shield gently in the middle of the room and vanished. The eerie part wasn't the blood. It was the damage. The shield was carved with deep, unnatural grooves, marks too jagged for bullets, too irregular for blades, too powerful for any earthly impact. It looked like something had chewed through the vibranium itself, like reality had taken bites out of the metal. Tony knelt beside it, wiping a small section clean. His face tightened. "This isn't Steve's blood," he muttered. "At least, not all of it." Natasha frowned. "Then whose is it?" He checked the readings. "Some of it matches Steve's DNA, but the rest," his voice stopped. There was no category for what he was reading. No species. No origin. Just an unknown pattern that twisted like corrupted code. Before they could process the horror, a cold gust swept through the warehouse. The temperature dropped so drastically their breath turned white instantly. Natasha's hand went to her weapon. Tony's suit flickered as if something invisible brushed past him. The shadows moved, shifting like liquid smoke. Something had been there recently. Something that didn't want to be seen. Thor arrived next, led by storm clouds that formed on their own. The moment he entered, he froze. A faint crackle of ancient energy pulsed through the air, an echo of the same force Steve encountered under the Arctic ice. Thor stepped toward the shield and placed his hand above it. Lightning sparked at his fingertips, drawn to the dried blood like metal to a magnet. "This is no mortal wound," he whispered. "The creature that bled here, its energy is older than Midgard." But that wasn't the worst discovery. Natasha found claw marks on the floor near the shield. 5 deep scratches carved into the wood. At first she thought an animal made them, until she saw the shape. They weren't claws. They were fingerprints. Human fingerprints. And judging by the spacing, the size, and the pressure, they belonged to Steve Rogers. It looked like he had tried to drag the shield toward himself, or away from something. Tony's voice lowered. "If these marks are Steve's, then he was alive when this happened." Natasha swallowed. And he wasn't alone. The wind outside suddenly stopped, as if the world was holding its breath. Because Steve Rogers' shield hadn't just returned. It had returned with a message. Something had taken Captain America. And whatever it was, it wanted them to come looking. Tony didn't wait to send the shield to a lab. He set up a mobile analysis station right there in the warehouse, cables snaking across the blood-stained floor while Natasha paced like a predator sensing something still lurking in the shadows. Thor stood silently, eyes narrowed, as if listening to voices only he could hear. The air felt charged. Every breath carried a weight, as if the warehouse itself was watching them. When Tony isolated the first sample, the results came back in seconds, then glitched, then repeated, then glitched again. Something in the blood was interfering with his scanners. It behaved like a living code, constantly shifting, rewriting itself. Natasha leaned over his shoulder. "What does that mean?" Tony blew out a breath. "I'm reading 2 DNA signatures, overlapping. One is unmistakably Steve Rogers." He paused, jaw tightening. "The other one is something else. Something that shouldn't exist." Natasha frowned. "Define, shouldn't exist." Tony zoomed in on the structure. This isn't human, alien, or any known species. It's like, he hesitated. Like a copy of Steve. But corrupted. Twisted. As if something tried to become him and failed halfway. Thor's grip tightened on Mjolnir. A mimic. His voice trembled with a rare unease. A thing born from the void between realms. They shaped themselves in the image of their prey. A sudden creak echoed through the warehouse. All three froze. Tony's scanners flickered. Natasha raised her weapon. Thor's eyes glowed. Something crawled across the roof, moving with a slow, sticky scrape. The shadows lengthened, stretching unnaturally. The air thinned. Then, silence. Tony took a breath and returned to the analysis, though his hands shook slightly. "There's something else," he whispered. Steve's fingerprints on the floor, they weren't from grabbing the shield. Tony rewound the scanner's thermal reconstruction. A faint heat signature formed, a partial imprint, like a ghost replaying its final moment. Steve's hand wasn't reaching toward the shield. It was pushing it away. Natasha's eyes widened. He didn't want whatever was with him to take it. But why? Tony asked. It's his shield. Thor turned slowly, gaze fixed on the deep claw marks carved into the vibranium. Because the creature wanted it, he said. And Steve understood that giving it the shield would doom us all. Before they could process that, Tony's computer emitted a sharp, unnatural tone. The screen flashed with a symbol none of them recognized, a jagged spiral, pulsing and rotating like it was alive. The signal wasn't coming from the blood. It was coming from beneath the floor. Tony ripped open a panel. Underneath was something wrapped in frost, a small metal cube, humming softly. It was alien in design, yet etched with patterns resembling the super soldier serum's molecular structure. Natasha stepped back. Someone planted this. Thor shook his head. Not someone. Something. The cube pulsed once and discharged a wave of energy that knocked dust from the ceiling. Tony stabilized it before it detonated, but the wave had already done its job, activating every light in the warehouse at once. And that's when they saw it. On the far wall, written in smeared, half-frozen blood, a message. Not Steve. The letters looked rushed, frantic, as if someone wrote them while being dragged away. Natasha swallowed hard. So the thing that returned, wasn't him. Tony checked the cube again. This device didn't track Steve, he whispered. It tracked what took him. The wind outside began to howl, rising like a scream. Something large moved through the fog. Heavy footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Tony's scanners blinked red. Something's coming, he whispered. Thor stepped forward, lightning crackling across his arms. But deep down, all of them felt the same cold truth. If the creature had Steve's DNA. If it bled like him. If it moved like him. Then finding Steve Rogers might mean facing a version of him they were never meant to meet. You. The footsteps outside didn't sound like a creature stalking prey. They sounded deliberate, like someone who knew exactly where he was going. Tony muted his scanners. Natasha steadied her breathing. Thor held Mjolnir high as lightning flickered through the cracks in the warehouse roof. The door creaked. Slowly. Too slowly. As if whoever, or whatever, was coming and wanted them to hear every inch of metal bending open. A shadow stretched across the floor before the figure even stepped inside. Broad shoulders. A familiar silhouette. A posture every Avenger recognized instantly. Steve Rogers. Or something pretending to be him. He stepped into the moonlight, and the world seemed to freeze. The same jawline. The same stance. The same uniform, torn, ripped, frostbitten. But his eyes were wrong. Hollow, empty, glowing faintly with a blue light that didn't belong to any living thing. His skin had cracks running through it like shattered glass, as if something inside him was trying to break out. Natasha whispered, Steve? The figure lifted his head. The movement was too smooth, almost mechanical. He didn't answer. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Tony's sensors kicked in automatically. That thing has Steve's heat signature, but no heartbeat. Thor moved forward. Reveal yourself, creature. You are not the captain. The figure tilted his head at Thor's voice, the way an animal reacts to an unfamiliar sound. Then, with a movement faster than human sight, he lunged. Thor barely raised Mjolnir before the impostor slammed into him, launching the god of thunder across the warehouse. The impact shook the entire structure. Natasha fired multiple shots, each bullet hit the impostor's body with muffled thuds, embedding into skin that absorbed them like clay. He didn't even flinch. Tony activated his repulsors and fired a full-power blast. The creature staggered, not from pain, but from recognition. It looked down at the scorch on its chest and then glared at Tony with something resembling hunger. It moved again, but this time, it changed. Its arm elongated like liquid shadow, stretching unnaturally as it struck at Tony with enough force to dent his armor. The blow sent him crashing into a wall, sparks bursting from his suit. Natasha rolled under the monster's second swipe and sliced its leg with her electrified batons. But instead of blood, a thick black substance oozed out, then immediately receded, sealing the wound as if time reversed. "What the hell is this thing?" she shouted. Tony coughed, checking his HUD. "It's copying combat styles. It knows Steve's moves, and ours." The creature snapped its gaze toward Natasha, and for a split second, its face glitched, Steve's expression replaced by something monstrous, a jagged grin stretching too wide, too sharp. Then it spoke. Not with words from its mouth, but with Steve's voice, echoed and distorted, like a broken radio playing memories. "Help me." Natasha froze. Tony's heart dropped. Even Thor hesitated. And in that single moment of hesitation, the creature attacked again. It moved like Steve in battle, the same footwork, the same precision, the same deadly efficiency, but amplified beyond human limits. Every strike carried the weight of something ancient wearing a perfect illusion. Thor recovered first. Lightning erupted across his body as he hurled Mjolnir with earth-shaking force. The hammer collided with the creature, tearing half its torso apart. For one breath, it seemed over. Then the creature's body reformed. Bones snapped back. Flesh pulled together. Blue cracks shone brighter. It stood up, stronger. Tony's voice trembled. "It's not trying to mimic Steve, it's trying to replace him." The creature turned sharply, as if hearing Tony's fear. Its jaw unhinged slightly, crackling with blue energy, and it whispered. "One Steve must die." Thor raised his hammer. Natasha gripped her batons. Tony powered up every weapon. Because now they knew the truth. This wasn't the thing that took Steve. This was the version it left behind. "You." The creature's words hung in the air like ice. Not shouted, not roared, whispered, as if spoken directly inside their minds. One Steve must die. Natasha tightened her grip. Tony steadied his breathing. Thor's eyes narrowed as lightning crawled up his arms like living veins. But the creature didn't attack immediately. Instead, it stepped backward, body glitching, flickering between Steve's form and something far darker. Tony scanned the creature again. Every time it shifted, its molecular structure rippled like a reflection on broken water. "There's something underneath its skin," he said quietly. "Something trapped, or trying to get out." As if responding to him, the creature seized its own face, digging its fingers into its cheeks. The skin tore like stretched rubber, and beneath it, a second face flickered, hollow eyes, cracked features, a distorted reflection of Steve Rogers screaming soundlessly. Natasha stepped back. "That's him, that's the real Steve." The creature lunged at her, but Thor intercepted, slamming Mjolnir into its chest. The shockwave shook the entire warehouse. But this time the creature didn't reform instantly. It staggered, twitching violently, like two separate beings fighting for control inside one broken shell. A voice spilled out, not the creature's distorted copy, but Steve's actual voice, raw and desperate. "Don't let it cross, it's coming, it wants the shield." Then the creature's head snapped back, and the blue cracks across its body pulsed like veins about to burst. The monster regained control with a guttural growl. Tony backed up. He's trapped inside it. He's literally fused to the thing. Thor stepped forward. "Then we free him. No matter the cost." Natasha's eyes locked onto the shield lying on the ground, still stained in that twisted mixture of blood. Something in her instinct clicked. The creature wasn't here to kill them. It was here for that shield. Every time it moved, its gaze drifted to it, hunger burning in those hollow eyes. Tony noticed too. It needs the shield to complete something. Maybe to stabilize itself. Maybe to replace Steve fully. Before anyone could stop her, Natasha sprinted for the shield and kicked it deeper into the shadows. The creature howled, a sound that cracked windows and shook dust from the rafters. It turned its full attention on her. Lightning flashed as Thor tackled the creature, slamming it into the concrete. The floor shattered. Black tendrils whipped from its back, latching onto Thor's armor, draining energy. Tony blasted them off, firing repulsors rapid fire, heat building until his suit began to overheat. Natasha reached the shield, but the moment her fingers brushed it, she felt a shock, like touching a memory. A whisper. A faint echo of Steve's voice saying her name. She clenched her jaw. "We're getting him back," she muttered. She slid the shield across the floor to Tony, who caught it with a struggling grip. The creature's eyes widened with fury as Tony held the shield between them. "You want it?" Tony said, voice shaking. "Then come get it." The creature launched itself like a missile. At the last second, Thor summoned a thunderbolt so powerful it split the roof open. The lightning hit the shield through Tony's suit and exploded outward in a blinding wave, engulfing the creature completely. The warehouse trembled as the monster shrieked, body cracking, collapsing, peeling apart like broken mirror shards. Inside the cracks, for a fraction of a second, they saw Steve. Weak. Fading. Reaching out. Then the creature shattered into dust and vanished into the night wind, leaving only silence. Tony fell to his knees. Did we save him?" Natasha swallowed hard. "No. That wasn't him. That was just a piece." Thor stared into the frozen darkness where the creature vanished. His voice was low and certain. "The real Steve Rogers is alive. But he is trapped in a place no mortal should ever walk." Tony's suit flickered as the last reading popped up on his HUD, a single coordinate. Not on Earth. Not in this dimension. Somewhere else. Somewhere calling for help. And the final message pulsing on the screen wasn't written by the creature. It was from Steve himself. "Don't come for me.